It happened on a crisp October night, right in my own kitchen, under the warm glow of the chandelier I'd bought secondhand 15 years ago. My son Ethan stood across from me, face flushed with anger, and bourbon, his finger stabbing the air like a weapon. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I wish Victoria had raised me instead of you. At least then I'd know what real class looks like. The words didn't just cut, they detonated, scattering decades of sacrifice into dust. Victoria Hale, his mother in law, the queen of curated perfection, with her tailored suits and designer bags, a woman who walked into our lives the day Ethan married Isabella and decided my worth ended where her wealth began. For 37 years, I'd been Ethan's constant workin', double shifts, skipping meals, trading dreams for bills. I'd kept a roof over his head when his father vanished, mortgaged my soul to put him through college, emptied my retirement so he could launch his shiny new business. And this was my reward. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just folded the dish towel in my hands and felt something inside me go cold. The switch flipped. The woman who gave everything, she was gone. I stood there in that kitchen for a long moment, staring at the son I had poured my life into, and something inside me crystallized. The Charlotte Miller who bent until she broke, who worked herself into exhaustion just to see him smile, she was gone. You really mean that? I asked softly, almost curious, as if the answer might still redeem him. Ethan hesitated, but the alcohol made him honest. Yeah, Mom, maybe if Victoria had raised me, I'd know how to carry myself in a room without sounding cheap. Cheap. 37 years of sacrifice reduced to that single word. I didn't reply, I just nodded, turned back to the sink, and washed my hands slowly, like I was rinsing off the last traces of the woman I used to be. That night, after Ethan slammed the door and drove back to his picture-perfect life in Charlotte's ritzy suburbs, I sat at my worn kitchen table and let the silence settle. There were no tears, just a cold, hard clarity I'd never felt before. For decades, my existence had revolved around making sure Ethan never felt the hunger I knew as a child. I worked double shifts at the textile plant, then cleaned houses at night. I sold the ring my mama left me so he could have a down payment on a decent car. Every prom suit, every basketball camp, every out-of-state tournament paid for with my hands raw from scrubbing floors. When college came, Ethan wanted Duke. I suggested community college, told him it was smart financially. But Ethan's voice cracked when he said, "Please, Mom. Everyone else is going. Don't make me the kid who couldn't afford his dream." So I didn't. I took out loans, cashed in the tiny life insurance payout from his grandmother, lived on ramen and generic cereal while sending him money for textbooks and frat fees. He never asked how I managed it. He just assumed I could. When he married Isabella, beautiful, polished from one of those families that have money and make sure you know it, I smiled through my nerves. Victoria Hale walked into the wedding like royalty, dripping in pearls and perfume, introducing herself to everyone like she owned the place. And maybe she did, because from that day forward, my son wasn't really mine anymore. At first, I thought it was just distance. He was building a life, starting a family, but the calls got shorter, the visits less frequent. When he needed babysitting, I was there. When he needed a loan $50,000, his voice, casual like it was nothing, I said yes, even though it drained every last dime I had. I believed him when he promised to pay me back. I always believed him. And what did I get for it? A man who stood in my kitchen and told me he wished another woman had raised him. That night I made a decision, not just to stop helping him, not just to stop loving him in the old way. No, I decided to make him understand what it costs to bite the hand that fed you. But revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It's patient, it's precise, it's a slow turning of the screws until the person who thought they were untouchable realizes they're standing on quicksand. I spent the next morning on my porch with a cup of coffee and a notebook listing everything I knew about Victoria Hale. Every story she'd bragged about at family gatherings, every inconsistency in her perfectly curated life. Because while Ethan saw a queen, I'd always sensed the cracks in her crown. People like Victoria are easy to predict. They can't help flaunting what they don't truly own. I started digging, not out of anger, but with a calm, methodical focus that surprised even me. and the more I uncovered, the colder I became. Victoria wasn't born into wealth like she claimed. She reinvented herself in her 30s after two failed marriages and a bankruptcy. Her real estate empire built on loans stacked like a house of cards, designer clothes, maxed out credit. I learned all this through public records and a few quiet conversations in places where gossip flows as freely as sweet tea. But I didn't stop there. No, this was just the groundwork for something bigger, something Ethan wouldn't see coming until it was far too late to stop. The first strike had to look like coincidence, like the universe finally catching up to a fraud. I wasn't about to storm into Ethan's life waving a folder of secrets. He'd just accuse me of being jealous. No, this had to be slow, quiet, devastating. I started with the real estate firm, one plain manila envelope, no return address, inside copies of Victoria's bankruptcy filings and recent credit reports Marcus had uncovered. No accusations, no dramatic threats, just facts printed in black and white with a sticky note that read, "Might want to review your agent's financial integrity before it becomes a liability." Within a week, the ripples started. I knew because Victoria called Isabella during one of my babysitting weekends, her voice sharp enough to slice through the phone line. "They're auditing my accounts," she hissed, unaware that I was in the next room pouring apple juice for the kids. Some anonymous complaint. Probably one of those jealous cows at the office. "Mom, calm down," Isabella soothed. "You're the top agent there. They won't find anything." "Oh, they'll find something," Victoria muttered under her breath. "If they dig far enough, they always do." I smiled into my coffee. Phase one was working. The second strike was more social. See, Victoria's power didn't come from her job, it came from perception. Her entire kingdom was built on gossip and appearances. So I became a whisper in the wind. I created a fake social media profile, just another bored suburban woman obsessed with charity events and wine tastings. I joined Victoria's circles online, liked her posts, left harmless comments. Then, like dropping sugar in tea, I stirred in the poison. Is it true what they're saying about Victoria's bankruptcy? I mean, it's public record. I heard she changed her name years ago. Why would someone do that unless they had something to hide? Never accusations, just questions. Questions spread faster than lies because people answer them with their own imagination. By the end of the month, the Queen's armor was cracking. The lavish dinners stopped appearing on Instagram. The designer bags vanished from her selfies. When I saw her at Isabella's birthday brunch, she looked tight around the eyes like someone holding back a scream. That's when Marcus delivered the next gift proof of an extramarital friendship. Victoria had been entertaining with a developer who funneled clients her way, clients whose money had a way of disappearing into business expenses. I didn't even have to use it. Not yet, because fate handed me something better. Richard Mr. Hale himself called Ethan. I know because I heard the voicemail when Ethan left his phone on the counter while checking on the kids. Son Richard said, his tone clipped icy. "If you have any sense, you'll keep your finances separate from your mother-in-law. I just saw credit card statements I never signed, and I'll be damned if I'm going down with her." By the next week, Victoria was sleeping in the guest room. Her marriage was collapsing in slow motion, and I watched it unfold like a primetime drama, except I wasn't the audience. I was the director. Meanwhile, Ethan and Isabella were cracking too. I noticed it during dinner one night when I drove up to drop off Madison's school project. Voices floated through the open window, sharp and jagged. "You think I'm going to bankroll your mother's mess?" Ethan's voice low and furious. "She's family, Ethan," Isabella shot back. "She's going through a hard time. We can't just abandon her." "We, or me," he snapped. "Because last I checked, I'm the one paying the mortgage, the car notes, the private school tuition. And now, you want me to cover your mom's shopping addiction, too." The slam of a door punctuated the fight. Isabella stormed out to her car without noticing me standing in the driveway. Her eyes were glassy, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the keys. "Everything okay?" I asked gently, playing the role of concerned mother-in-law. She forced a brittle smile. "Just a disagreement. You know how marriage is." "Oh, I do," I said softly, with a sweetness that hid the steel underneath. "It's all about trust, isn't it?" She didn't answer. By Christmas, Victoria was radioactive. The brokerage put her on administrative leave. pending review, which was polite code for, "We think you're a thief." Richard filed for legal separation, and the woman who once strutted into every room like she owned it was suddenly small. But the piece de resistance came during a family dinner at Ethan's house in late January. I'd been helping out more, offering to watch the kids while they cooked, just to keep myself close to the action. That night, as laughter tried and failed to fill the tension, Victoria cleared her throat. "Ethan," she said, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "I hate to ask, but I could use a little help. Just a short-term loan until I get things sorted." How much? Ethan asked warily. 50,000, the same number he once asked me for. The irony was so sweet it nearly made me laugh. "I just need to keep up appearances until this misunderstanding blows over," she added quickly. Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowing. 50 grand isn't a misunderstanding, Victoria. It's family, Ethan. She pressed, voice sugary with desperation. "You believe in family, don't you?" For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition. A memory maybe of me saying the same word years ago when I signed away my retirement for him. And then he said the words I'd been waiting for. "I can't do that right now." The Queen had finally knelt. But I wasn't done. Oh no, this was just the opening act. Because soon Ethan would realize that the woman he put on a pedestal was nothing more than a mirage, and by the time the truth hit him, his perfect little world would already be ash and smoke. 3 weeks after that awkward dinner, my phone rang just after sunrise. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, a rare occurrence these days. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail just to remind him what silence feels like. But curiosity won. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, the confidence I once admired now hanging by a thread. "Can I come over? I need to talk." It was the first time in years he'd asked for my advice without dressing it up as a favor to me. When he walked through my front door later that morning, the sight of him stopped me cold. My polished, self-assured son looked defeated. Dark circles bruised his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled and his hands trembled as he wrapped them around the coffee mug I offered. "What's going on, Ethan?" I asked gently, as if I hadn't been orchestrating this moment from the start. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. "It's bad, Mom. Worse than I thought. Richard and Victoria are divorcing. He's accusing her of fraud, like criminal fraud. And now Isabella's pressuring me to help her mom financially, maybe even let her move in with us." I kept my face neutral, but inside I savored every word. "And you don't want to?" "I can't," he said, frustration cracking his voice. "Mom, you should see the numbers. Her debt isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. Credit cards maxed out, loans stacked like dominoes. Richard hired a forensic accountant. He found forged signatures on loan documents. If the DA decides to press charges..." He trailed off, staring into his coffee like it might offer absolution. "And Isabella," I prompted. "She thinks Richard's just being vindictive. She says Victoria's a victim of bad luck and jealousy, and that we should stand by her." I tilted my head. And what do you think? His eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who used to trust my judgment without question. "I think Victoria's toxic," he whispered, "and I think marrying into her family was the biggest mistake of my life." The admission hung in the air, heavy and raw. "Then you know what you need to do," I said softly. He laughed bitterly. "What? Divorce Isabella, kick her mother to the curb? How do I do that without blowing up my entire life?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Sometimes, Ethan, you have to let things burn before you can rebuild." His grip tightened, like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. "I don't know if I can handle this alone." There it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. "You're not alone," I said, my voice warm but firm. "But you need to ask yourself one question: who's been loyal to you? Through everything?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even shame. "You," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Always you." And just like that, the scales began to tip. Over the next few weeks, the cracks in Ethan's marriage widened into canyons. Arguments that once simmered quietly now erupted into shouting matches. I didn't need to snoop. Isabella made it easy by calling me after each fight, her voice trembling with panic. "Your son is being unreasonable," she cried during one late-night call. "Family helps family. That's what Victoria always taught us. Oh, sweetheart, I murmured my tone. Honey sweet, family does help family, but only when family tells the truth. Silence on the other end, then a choked, "Are you saying my mother lied?" "I'm saying appearances can be deceiving," I said, "and loyalty goes both ways." Click. End of call. By February, the Hale divorce was splashed across local gossip blogs. Words like embezzlement, fraudulent transactions, and possible indictment clung to Victoria's name like barnacles. The woman who once floated through life on clouds of perfume and privilege was now sinking fast, and she was dragging Isabella with her. That's when Ethan came to me again, this time with a plea. "Mom," he said, standing in my kitchen like a man who'd run out of road, "I need help. I know I don't deserve it, not after everything, but if I don't figure this out, I'm going to lose my kids. Isabella's threatening divorce if I don't bail her mother out. And if I go down financially, I'll lose everything I've built." His voice cracked on that last word, everything like he finally understood how fragile that everything really was. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "I need guidance," he admitted. "Perspective. I can't see straight right now." I studied him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. Then I smiled a slow, deliberate smile that made him flinch. "Then listen carefully," I said, "because from this point on, you follow my lead. No arguments, no second guessing. If you want to save your family, Ethan, you do exactly what I tell you." And just like that, the son who once looked down on me for being ordinary was about to learn how extraordinary I could be. When Ethan agreed to follow my lead, I knew this was my opening, my chance to pull him back from the edge, and for the first time in years, remind him who had truly been in his corner all along. We sat at the same kitchen table where his insults had once burned through me like acid, only now the power dynamic had shifted. He leaned forward desperate while I held the cards close to my chest. First, I said calmly, "You lock down your accounts. Every joint account you share with Isabella, freeze it or separate it immediately." His brows knitted. "Isn't that extreme, Ethan?" I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Victoria forged signatures for loans. Do you really think she won't use your credit as a lifeline if she gets the chance?" "This isn't paranoia. It's survival." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay. What else?" "You document everything," I continued. "Every text, every email, every financial transaction tied to Isabella or her mother. You think this is about pride? No. This is about custody." His head jerked up. "Custody? Mom, I'm not—" "You said she's threatening divorce," I interrupted. "When a marriage like this blows up, it's not love that wins, it's leverage. And the person with the cleanest record and the strongest evidence walks away with the kids." He stared at me like he'd never really seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd spent his whole life thinking I was soft, because I loved him too much to show my edge. But love, real love, knows when to sharpen its teeth. Over the next few weeks, Ethan followed every directive like a soldier. He hired a forensic accountant to audit his business on my insistence. He moved funds into a trust under legal advisement, ensuring Victoria's sticky fingers couldn't reach them. And every time Isabella tried to guilt trip him into writing a check for her mother, he responded with calm, lawyer-approved statements that made her furious. "Do you know what she called me last night?" Ethan muttered one evening as we reviewed documents in my living room. "Heartless. She said I'm abandoning her family." "Good," I said, without looking up from the papers. "Good." He blinked. "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "It means she's realizing the gravy train is over. Let her be angry. Anger makes people sloppy, and sloppy people make mistakes you can use in court." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head with a low chuckle. "You're scary, Mom." "No," I said softly, sliding the last document into a folder. "I'm necessary." Meanwhile, I played my part as the doting grandmother, the neutral party, the one person everyone trusted to stay calm while chaos brewed. But behind the scenes, I was pulling strings like a puppeteer. When Isabella called to vent, I listened. Every detail was ammunition. When Victoria tried to fish for sympathy, I fed her just enough sweetness to keep her talking, Gathering crumbs of information Marcus could turn into gold. And oh, Marcus delivered. He found evidence that Victoria had been using shell companies to funnel consulting fees from developers' fees that mysteriously disappeared into personal accounts. Combined with the forged loan signatures, it painted a picture of a woman not just drowning in debt, but willing to commit felonies to stay afloat. Do we take this to the DA? Marcus asked during one of our clandestine coffee meetings. Not yet, I said, my tone cool. First, we make sure Ethan's safe. Then, when the timing's perfect, we let Victoria burn. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a masterclass in consequences. By early spring, Ethan's transformation was undeniable. The man who once sneered at my lack of sophistication was now sitting across from high-powered attorneys, nodding with grim determination as they laid out strategies for asset protection and custody proceedings. One night after another long session with his legal team, he showed up at my door with takeout and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, setting the food on my counter. I smiled faintly. "You'd figure it out." He shook his head. "No, I wouldn't. Not like this, not this smart." For the first time in years, there was respect in his voice, not the patronizing kind he'd offered me when he thought I didn't know better, but real bone-deep respect. And that was worth more than every dollar I'd ever spent on him. But I wasn't finished, because for all his progress, Ethan still carried a piece of naivety, a hope that maybe somehow things could go back to the way they were with Isabella, and that hope was dangerous. So one evening, as the sunset bled red across the horizon, I said the words I'd been holding back. "Ethan," I murmured, "you need to prepare for the possibility that Isabella won't choose you over her mother. Blood like that runs deep, and sometimes it runs blind." His jaw tightened. "I can't just give up on my marriage." "I'm not asking you to," I said gently. "I'm asking you to fight smart. And fighting smart means knowing when to stop saving someone who doesn't want to be saved." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me the seed had been planted, and once it sprouted, everything would change. The first real crack in Ethan's resolve came on a Tuesday evening months into our quiet war. He showed up at my door again, but this time he didn't look defeated, he looked furious. "She served me papers," he said, voice flat, knuckles white as he handed me a thick envelope. "Divorce. Full custody demand. And she's accusing me of financial abandonment." I skimmed the documents, my jaw tightening with every line. Isabella was claiming Ethan had willfully withheld resources, painting herself as a victim. And the kicker, her attorney had attached a list of assets, every single one Ethan owned, right down to the cabin his grandfather built in the Smokies. "She's going for blood," I said quietly. He laughed bitterly. "Guess she learned from the best." It was a low blow at himself, but I didn't correct him. Instead, I took the papers, stacked them neatly, and said the words I knew he needed to hear. "Then you fight harder." The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, subpoenas, and late-night strategy sessions. Ethan stopped drinking to cope. He started running at dawn, showing up to meetings sharp and steady. The man who once threw tantrums over trivial things was now a soldier in a war he couldn't afford to lose. But Victoria wasn't done yet. No, the Queen had one last card to play. Marcus called me on a Friday night, his voice grim. "Charlotte, you need to see this." When I met him at our usual spot, he slid over a copy of an affidavit sworn testimony from a witness claiming Ethan had engaged in financial misconduct at his company. It was fabricated, of course, but the signature at the bottom made my stomach clench. "Victoria," I hissed. Marcus nodded. "She paid someone off to file this. If the court buys it, Ethan could lose everything, even custody." For the first time in this long game, I felt the edge of panic. Not because I doubted my ability to counter, but because I knew how fragile Ethan still was. One wrong move, and this could break him. That night, I sat across from my son at my kitchen table, our battlefield, our confessional, and laid it out plain. "They're trying to destroy you, Ethan," I said, sliding the affidavit toward him. "Not just take your kids, not just take your money, they want to ruin you." He stared at the paper, his jaw locking, and then something shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up the document and tore it in half. Then in half again. No, he said, voice low but steady. They can try, but they're not going to win. The steel in his tone made my chest tighten with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. This wasn't the boy I raised, the one who once called me cheap, who thought love was measured in dollars and status. This was a man forged in fire, and I couldn't decide if I loved him more for it or mourned the innocence he'd lost. What do we do? He asked finally. I reached for his hand, squeezing it hard. We turned the tables. You've played defense long enough. It's time to go on the attack. And so we did. Marcus unearthed proof that Victoria had funneled money through shell companies, evidence strong enough to trigger a criminal probe. Ethan's legal team filed motions that painted him as the responsible parent fighting to protect his children from a toxic environment. Every dirty trick Victoria had pulled, we dragged into the light piece by piece. When the custody hearing finally came, the courtroom was a war zone. Isabella sat stiff beside her attorney eyes, flashing with the same entitlement that had blinded her for years. Victoria. She didn't even look at me when I walked past. For once, her pearls and perfume couldn't mask the stench of fear. Ethan took the stand, and for the first time I saw him speak, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a father. He talked about his kids, how he coached their soccer games, packed their lunches, kissed their foreheads every night. His voice cracked once, but he never faltered. And when the judge awarded him primary custody, the sound of Isabella's sobs slashed through the room like glass. Outside the courthouse, Ethan stood in the sunlight, papers clutched in his hand, tears slipping down his face. "We won," he whispered, like he couldn't believe it. "No," I said softly, wrapping my arms around him. "You did. You became the man you were meant to be." For a moment, we just stood there, two warriors who had survived the storm. But in the quiet corners of my mind, I knew this wasn't just his victory. It was mine, too. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. For both of us. 2 years later, the world looked different. Not because it had changed, but because Ethan had. His business, once teetering on the edge of collapse, was now thriving, not through shortcuts or smoke and mirrors, but through honest work and relentless grit. Gone were the flashy cars and designer suits that had once defined his sense of worth. These days he drove a modest truck, wore shirts he didn't mind getting paint on when he helped his kids build tree houses in the backyard. And those kids, they adored him, not because of what he could buy, but because he was present. He packed their lunches, cheered at their soccer games, read bedtime stories with voices that made them giggle until they collapsed in blankets. As for Isabella, she fought for a while, appeals, accusations, every desperate play Victoria coached her to make. But when Victoria's world finally imploded under the weight of fraud charges, Isabella's fire burned out. She signed the final settlement with a hand that shook, and then she disappeared from the headlines like smoke on the wind. Through it all, Ethan never missed a payment on the loans he owed me, not because I demanded it, but because he needed to make it right. Every month, without fail, an envelope arrived with a check and a handwritten note, one step closer. But the day he made the last payment, April 17th, a date I'll never forget, he showed up at my door with something more than money. "Come outside," he said, grinning like a boy again. I followed him to the driveway where a small sapling stood in a clay pot. "It's a dogwood," he said, pressing the cool handle of a shovel into my hands. "Thought we could plant it together, something that lasts." We dug in silence for a while, the spring air soft around us, until he spoke again, voice low, almost breaking. "Mom, I was cruel to you, blinded by things that never mattered. And you didn't just save me. You saved my kids, my life, everything." I looked at him then, this man who had once measured love in dollars and status, and felt tears sting my eyes. "I didn't save you, Ethan," I said softly, patting the soil around the sapling. "I just reminded you who you were before the world convinced you to forget." He wrapped his arms around me, then not the hurried, obligatory hug of a busy son, but the kind that holds, that says thank you when words fail. As we stood there beneath the Carolina sky, roots sinking into the earth at our feet, I realized something revenge might have started this journey, but it wasn't what defined it. love did. Fierce, flawed, uncompromising love, the kind that fights like hell, even when it has to draw blood to teach the truth. And that, I thought, as the dogwood swayed in the breeze, was worth every scar. True strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do after you've been shattered. Charlotte's journey teaches us that love is not blind. Real love sees clearly and still chooses to fight. For years, she gave without expectation, believing sacrifice alone would earn loyalty. But when that loyalty was betrayed, she didn't collapse under the weight of bitterness. She rose sharper and wiser, proving that boundaries are not acts of cruelty, they are acts of survival. Her story reminds us that family ties don't excuse exploitation. Loving someone doesn't mean enabling their destruction or yours. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices, even if it means becoming the storm they never saw coming. Above all, this is a story about redemption. Not just for Ethan, who learned the value of integrity, but for Charlotte, who reclaimed her worth. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, the greatest victory isn't wealth or status, it's standing tall when others tried to make you small. Set boundaries early and enforce them. Generosity is beautiful, but when it turns into self erasure, it becomes a weapon others can use against you. Learn to recognize manipulation disguised as family loyalty, and don't be afraid to say no when saying yes means losing yourself. If someone you love falls into destructive patterns, remember saving them doesn't always mean shielding them. Sometimes it means stepping back or even pushing back so they can learn resilience. And if you've been burned by betrayal, take a page from Charlotte's book, Don't Lash Out Blindly. Act with clarity. Channel your pain into purpose. Because revenge for revenge's sake destroys everyone, but justice paired with wisdom can rewrite an entire story.